Good luck to me, no more spending on raising kids. Let's end our marriage. I was completely surprised when John suddenly said these words while we were getting ready for a funeral. I knew he was selfish, but this was even worse than I could have imagined. I want to marry someone, but she doesn't want kids. If Charlie is still alive, I'll keep losing money on child support and medical bills, right? Oh, what a relief. It felt terrible that this man was Charlie's father, but I agreed to the divorce. My mind cleared, but inside, I was boiling. I agreed to the divorce. Yeah, then I'll take the house, so leave as soon as possible. Just wait until the funeral's over. Fine with that. John left on the day of the funeral. I read Charlie's will. Jane turned pale while relatives glared at him with fierce faces. It was time for a counterattack. I'm Natasha, a 42-year-old housewife. I used to translate for a company, but now I freelance. My husband John is 45, 3 years older than me. We married when I was 29, and he was a client at my company. The next year, our son Charlie was born, but John, being selfish, hardly helped raise him. Charlie was delicate since birth, frequently in and out of the hospital. I often blamed myself for not giving him a stronger body. But despite his struggles, he bravely faced treatments and held on for 12 years. Things got worse around his 12th birthday. During his first rainy season, constant coughing plagued him. His body rejected food, and his fever wouldn't break. We hurried him to the hospital, tried 4 treatments, but his symptoms barely improved. Mom, sorry for being in the hospital again. No need to apologize. You'll get better, right? Yeah, I'll do my best. With a weak smile, Charlie spoke. Tears welled up in me, but I held them back, not wanting to show weakness in front of him. After Charlie finally dozed off, I called John, but no matter how many times I dialed, he didn't answer. Thinking he might be in a meeting, I switched to messaging. John replied the next morning. Seeing his message, I called him immediately, and this time he answered right away. What's up so early? Don't give me that. Why won't you come? Charlie's fighting so hard. Well, my presence won't cure him, right? And by the way, the hospital bills must be adding up. Tell the doctor to bill him quickly. What? How can you say that? Can't hear you. I'm off to work. Wait. John hummed up without listening. He had always been indifferent toward Charlie, but this level of cruelty was new. I gripped my phone, shaking with anger. Even as the rainy season gave way to summer, Charlie's health didn't improve. Doctors doubted he'd make it to winter, so I scaled back my work to be with him as much as I could. Mom, you've been with me all day lately. Is your work okay? It's fine. I'm handling everything from home, so don't worry, if you say so. Charlie didn't seem convinced. He probably thought my work had slowed down because of him. After that chat, to spare him stress, I started bringing my laptop and working right in front of him. Charlie loved books and spent most of his days reading. He also enjoyed studying and would join the hospital school when he felt up to it. I wanted to let him do anything he wished, but John wasn't happy about it. Not only did he avoid visiting Charlie, but he also complained constantly at home. Hey, is that kid still not discharged? Staying in a private room, huh? What a waste of money. How can you say that when your son is fighting so hard? Why don't you visit him for once? I'm busy, okay? You visiting him is enough. John's attitude never changed, and he never visited Charlie in the hospital, despite being his father. I knew Charlie must be lonely, but I understood that forcing John to visit against his will wouldn't help, so I didn't push it further. By now, John often came home late, smelling of alcohol. He claimed it was for client entertaining, but lipstick on laundered shirts and motel receipts hinted at an affair. He had no time for Charlie, but made time for another woman. My love for John had faded, but I hesitated to divorce him, fearing it would upset Charlie. Despite my feelings, I endured it. Meanwhile, Charlie's health deteriorated. Summoned by his doctor, I received shocking news. I'm sorry, but he only has about a month left. What? Doctor, can't you do anything? As tears streamed down my face, The doctor assured me, "We'll do our best until the very end." For the next half month, we continued treatment, consulting with the doctor. However, Charlie's condition continued to weaken. "Am I going to be gone soon?" "What are you saying? There's so much more you want to do, right?" I encouraged him with those words, but privately cried away from his sight. When the doctor finally declared further treatment futile, I decided to bring Charlie home for his final moments. "Are we going home?" "Yes," the doctor said. "A change of scenery for a few days would be good." "Yay." Charlie's weak yet childlike response made me fight back tears. I informed John, but all he said was "etch" and left the house. This man is beyond redemption. I had completely lost hope in him. The discharge was set for the next evening, so I busied myself with preparations and paperwork. While packing Charlie's belongings, he suddenly asked me, "Mom, do you love Dad?" Taken aback by the sudden question, I stopped what I was doing. Charlie continued without waiting for my response. "Dad doesn't seem interested in me or you, so if you don't love Dad, I want you to divorce and live your life." Charlie must have sensed that things weren't going well between John and me, but as a parent, I couldn't let him worry about us until the end. I quickly put on a smile and replied, "What are you talking about? I love your dad, and he cares about us too. He's just too busy to visit, so don't worry, okay?" But okay. Charlie didn't seem convinced, but he dropped the matter. After that, he fell asleep, and I breathed a sigh of relief. 2 days later, Charlie passed away at home with me by his side. John never showed up till the end, and I stayed by Charlie's side, holding his hand. "Charlie, Charlie," I wailed, holding onto his cooling body, reminiscing about every moment since he entered my life. The doctor and a nurse who had been by our side since Charlie's youth joined us in mourning and explained the next steps. One of them handed me a letter from Charlie's bag. "This is from Charlie," he said, "to give it to you if anything happened." I received the letter from Charlie, expressing gratitude to the doctor and the nurse. Alone without John's assistance while Charlie battled his illness, I could only feel thankful for those who supported us during this challenging time. After they departed, I opened the letter beside Charlie. Its contents surprised me. What is this? Charlie's letter not only conveyed his gratitude, but also revealed something startling. Even as the funeral director discussed arrangements, I found my mind consumed by the letter's contents. Despite this, for Charlie's sake, I had to decide on the details, planning a modest and homey funeral. Then, the day before the funeral, John finally appeared, still smelling of alcohol. Alone, I had no energy left to confront him. John, noticing my exhaustion, casually remarked, "You aged," as he pulled out more alcohol from the fridge to drink. "Tomorrow is Charlie's funeral. Where have you been?" "I told you I was at work. What's with all these complaints? Why did I marry such a man? No, without him, I wouldn't have met Charlie." My mind was in turmoil. Charlie is no longer with us. Oh yeah, that's right. His attitude, as if Charlie was some distant relative, filled me with simmering anger. But arguing with him was pointless, so I decided to focus on the funeral arrangements for the next day. Good fortune for me, no more child-rearing expenses. Let's get divorced. What? I couldn't conceal my shock when John suddenly uttered this during the funeral preparations. I knew he was selfish, but this was too much. There's a woman I want to marry, but she doesn't want kids. So with Charlie alive, the child support and medical expenses would drain my money. Ah, what a relief! How terrible! I felt a chill run through me that such a man was Charlie's father. As my mind cleared, my anger surged. Fine, I agree to the divorce. All right then, I'll take the house. Get out as soon as you can. Just wait until after the funeral. Is that okay? John left on the day of the funeral. I read Charlie's will. John turned pale, and relatives glared at him with fierce expressions. Now it was time for my counterattack. The will, penned by Charlie, exposed John's affair. Until I read the will at the funeral, John had been playing the role of a grieving father, loudly crying. How could there be such a letter? No, it's not true. It's a prank, right, Natasha? I felt sorry for not visiting because of work, but this is too much. John tried to deny it, appearing pathetic. I silently took out an envelope from my bag and thrust photos in front of John. What? You took pictures? Disturbed by being caught in a photo, like being seen with the woman, arm in arm within this picture. Ah, no. As John stumbled over his words, his face still pale, I smiled sweetly and asked the relatives to pass around a few photos. Whispers of disgust and small cries of shock arose from all around. Despicable, not visiting his frail son, but with this woman in such a scandalous manner. The glares at John intensified, and he slumped down in his seat. I then presented John with the divorce papers. He looked up at me in shock, his voice cracking as if he was about to cry. You didn't pay attention to me because you were always nursing him. It was just a fling. Forgive me, I don't want a divorce. Not paying attention? You're not a child. I repeatedly asked you to help me nurse him, but you always ran away claiming work as an excuse. But nursing is dirty. As soon as John said that, he disappeared from my view, and when I looked down, he was crawling on the floor, with my father-in-law standing over him, breathing heavily. You, what do you mean nursing your own son is dirty? Enough with the jokes. A parent who doesn't care for their child isn't a parent at all. You're the lowest of the low. My in-laws had always adored Charlie. They celebrated every hospital discharge with a meal, bought Charlie his favorite things, and never missed a visit. They had been covering for John, believing his excuses about being busy at work, never imagining their son could be such a disgrace. Tears streamed down their faces as they glared at John, who sat in disbelief, clutching his cheek where he'd been struck. Natasha, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. If we knew he was such a man, we would have encouraged you to divorce him sooner. We are truly sorry. They began to bow deeply, and I hurried to lift them up. It wasn't their fault. Charlie loved his grandparents, and their presence was one reason I hadn't divorced John. You guys are not to blame. Look, Charlie's letter says thank you and stay healthy. Charlie and I both love you very much, Natasha. Thank you, sorry, Charlie. My mother-in-law hugged me, sobbing quietly. My father-in-law was also crying, apologizing to me. John, finally coming to his senses, stood up and pointed at me, yelling, "Don't be ridiculous. She's just an old lady who couldn't even take care of her husband, a failure of a wife." As my father-in-law lunged towards John, I stepped in front of him. John looked at me with a fearful yet defiant glare. What, you got something to say? Not really. This is reality. No one here is on your side. And make sure to pay back the money you've borrowed from many people, haven't you? How do you know about that? At my words, relatives who had lent John money began murmuring after reading Charlie's letter. I had informed the relatives about John's extravagant spending on a woman from a nightclub who enjoyed luxury items and overseas trips. John, funding all of it, could never afford such a lifestyle on his salary alone. Realizing this, I checked if anyone had lent him money. And to my surprise, it wasn't just John's relatives, but mine as well. Under the guise of Charlie's medical expenses, while I had initially informed them just to thank and promise repayment, with the current situation, they realized John had used the money not for Charlie, but for his affair. Don't play games with me. I lent that money thinking it was for Charlie. Give me back my $20,000 right now. Same here, I want my $40,000 back. These words triggered a cascade of demands from various relatives for the money they had lent. John looked around, his face turning paler with each claim. Then he turned to me, smiling weakly. Natasha, we're a couple, right? You'll help me, won't you? What? Are you serious? You didn't help with nursing, didn't contribute to the medical expenses, or even the living expenses, and instead borrowed from everyone for your own selfish needs. Unbelievable. Why would I help you? Don't say things like that with a pathetic voice. John slumped back down, seemingly out of energy to retort. I looked down at him, ready to deliver the final blow, and called to the entrance, "Cheryl, please come in." "Cheryl? Why is she here?" John's face was a picture of sheer panic as he stared at the entrance. The woman named Cheryl walked towards me hesitantly. She looked plain with light makeup, a stark contrast to the woman in the photos. I invited her on Charlie's last day. She was with you, right? I thought it would be nice if she could attend the funeral. I'm sorry about this. Save it. No need for such superficial words. Cheryl closed her mouth tightly at my response, her face as pale as John's. I handed her some documents. I called you here today to sign these. Please read them carefully and sign. $100,000. I can't pay that. It's impossible. It's not for you to decide whether you can pay or not. Cheryl pleaded with me through her eyes, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook easily. John, trembling, positioned himself between Cheryl and me. What now? It's my fault, so please forgive Cheryl. Demanding $100,000 from her is just too cruel. Why should I? I'm merely asking for compensation for the affair. John raised his eyebrows and let out a heavy sigh, inwardly screaming that I'm the one who wants to sigh. I waited for John's next words. That's because Cheryl is fragile, unlike you. How do you expect her to earn $100,000? How cruel can you be, John? Cheryl clung to John's back, both seemingly lost in each other. The icy stares weren't only from me. The relatives were ready to voice their disapproval. But I decided to add fuel to the fire. Cheryl, your son is hospitalized, right? Son. Cheryl flinched. I continued, he's 12, just like Charlie was always in the hospital. Your ex-husband took custody, right? Tough with all the hospital and treatment costs, not to mention the bed fees. You must be getting quite a demand for child support, aren't you? How? How do you know that? Cheryl looked at me as if she'd seen a ghost. John was frozen in shock. I pulled out some documents from my bag and handed them to John. He shakily read them, then suddenly pushed Cheryl away. Hey, what's this? Divorced with a kid? You never told me. Didn't you say the money was for your family living far away? I didn't lie. My son. Son is my family. So I've been with a used woman. Where's the true love you were after? My money? You were only after my body. Cheryl threw her shoe at John, enraged. John lunged at her, and they started brawling like children, but fortunately, a security guard intervened. I approached the disheveled pair with a smile. John, please sign the divorce papers and arrange for the alimony. Cheryl, I won't reduce your compensation by a single cent. John, what's your ex-husband said something about your affairs being a sickness that can't be cured. Seems like you have a few partners, so with that kind of leeway, expect enforced payments for the child support, treatment costs, and alimony. That's impossible. John hung his head, speechless, and Cheryl was led away by security, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I apologized to each relative for the disturbance, and they comforted me, bringing me to tears. After that, my divorce from John was finalized. We also agreed on the amount of alimony he had to pay, just as I had requested. This incident infuriated his parents tremendously. Moreover, the extended family was outraged to discover they had been deceived too. Giving him the cold shoulder, of course, he was asked to return the money he embezzled, and it seems like he borrowed it from some shady sources. To repay the debt, he's been working tirelessly with multiple jobs, but the repayment is so huge that he's rumored to have nothing left for living expenses. Eventually, unable to keep up with the ballooning interest, last month he was taken away by some intimidating guys. His parents don't even intend to file a missing person report, so while I hope he's safe, I can't help but wish he suffers unimaginable pain. As for Cheryl, all the men she dated found out about her affairs and the child she had. Cutting off all financial support at 30, she's considered old for her line of work, struggling to attract clients, and eventually had to turn to her parents. She paid the alimony in one lump sum. However, she's since been sent to work on a farm on some island, with her wages going directly to her parents for debt repayment. As for me, I moved with Charlie's memorial tablet. I bought a house near the ocean, something Charlie always wanted, and now live there alone with the cat he wished for. I look forward to the times when my in-laws visit, and we reminisce about Charlie. Another letter from Charlie arrived for me. In it, he wrote in slightly blurred script about his gratitude. Apologies for leaving for heaven first, and his wish to be my child again in another life. The letter ended with, Mom, stay true to yourself, stay healthy, and live a long life, inspiring me to live my life for Charlie. Despite the sadness of not seeing my beloved child grow up, I'm living each day to the fullest. I'm Faye, and I work in an office at a university hospital. I'm married to Stephen, and I thought this would be a new chapter in my life. But, surprise, our married life turned out to be really short. I didn't see that coming when we tied the knot. Stephen has been a manager at a home improvement store since we started dating. When we first met, I thought Stephen was kind, family-oriented, and decisive. He confidently proposed, and I said yes, thinking he was reliable. Stephen, who used to live with his parents, moved in with me after we got married. Despite our busy schedules, we managed to sync our days off and were planning our honeymoon. Just talking about it made me happy, and back then, I was really glad I married Stephen. But over time, things started to change. Our home, where Stephen and I lived, was a 3-bedroom apartment just 2 years old. It was new, albeit a bit far from the city and not a luxury high-rise, making it reasonably priced. Considering all factors, I decided to go for it, and living there was pretty convenient. Stephen wasn't into luxury, so it was comfortable for both of us. Then one day, Stephen told me, my mom and sister want to come over tomorrow to see our new home, so I've invited them. My initial reaction was that he should have talked to me about the date, considering I had work the next day while he was off. His decisiveness was good, but sometimes it hurt me when he didn't consider my feelings. I said, I'll be at work, is that okay? Stephen replied, sure, we'll just take a quick look around the house, and that's it. I agreed, thinking it would be a simple visit. However, when I got home the next evening, the atmosphere was lively. There was a pleasant smell, and in the living room, Stephen, my mother-in-law, and sister-in-law had prepared food and drinks, enjoying themselves. What's happening? I exclaimed. My mother-in-law, looking a bit tipsy, greeted me enthusiastically. Oh, Faye, you're home. Done with work? You've been working hard. My sister-in-law, with a cheerful expression, said, Hey, Buffet, you must be tired. But wow, this house is amazing. It's not fair that you get to live in such a place. Stephen was enjoying the moment, and I was the only one feeling out of the loop. I was told you were coming for a house tour, but did you plan on having dinner as well? I asked, trying not to upset them, as what was happening differed from what Stephen had told me. I felt a bit upset, but Stephen, with a smile, casually replied, my mom and sister said they had plenty of time, so we thought, why not have dinner? Even though he said it was their time he was considering, not mine. I wanted to convey that I don't dislike my mother-in-law or sister-in-law, but I don't want to be on my toes in my own home. However, Stephen said, my dad is not around anymore, and it's always just the two of them. They need a change of scenery once in a while. He said this in a carefree manner. Hearing this, my mother-in-law said, Stephen is such a kind boy, Faye. You should appreciate that you got to marry Stephen, as if I was being taken care of by Stephen. I wanted to retort, I'm working and earning too, you know. But then I thought, maybe it's okay to let them have a family dinner once in a while. So I decided to step back. I didn't want any conflict, and they had bought the groceries and prepared the meal themselves. But then my mother-in-law said something that left me shocked. But this fridge is stocked with good meat, high-quality meat. Really, it is delicious. I couldn't believe my ears for a moment. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were clearly using our groceries. The alcohol and snacks my sister-in-law enjoyed were the exact ones we bought. Didn't you get these yourself? I asked. My mother-in-law nonchalantly replied, Well, if there's this much in the fridge, no need to go shopping, right? Going to the supermarket is a hassle. She said it without any remorse. To add to it, she said, I'm tired now, so if you want to eat something, Faye, you'll have to make it yourself. I was genuinely angry about the whole situation. Though my emotions were ready to burst, I somehow managed to suppress my anger and responded with a forced smile. Is that so? Well, I'll handle my share then, I said, heading to my room. It seems some of my frustration leaked out when I closed the living room door, making a louder noise than intended. Shortly after, I could faintly hear my mother-in-law and sister-in-law talking. Oh my, is she always this rough? Is she okay? My sister-in-law added, in such a nice house. I wonder if Faye won't end up breaking something, right? Stephen casually responded, I'll remind her later, she's probably just tired from work. And after all that, my in-laws left without cleaning up. Stephen even came to my room and lightly scolded me. What's with all the irritation? It's not nice to my moms, you know. Honestly, all this without my permission, and them leaving without cleaning up was too much. When I told him, Stephen tried to pacify me. Calm down, it's a one-time thing. I'll take care of the cleaning, just relax. I wasn't convinced, but I thought it wasn't worth a fight and managed to suppress my anger. I forcibly considered it part of Stephen's family love and regained my composure. With our honeymoon approaching in a month, I didn't want to ruin our relationship. After all, this wouldn't happen again. Now I just need to focus on our honeymoon and lift my spirits. However, that honeymoon turned out to bring misfortune. A month later, we embarked on our honeymoon, a 3-night trip to Alaska. While I wouldn't have minded an overseas adventure, Stephen preferred to keep it simple. He felt staying within the country was sufficient, so we settled on this plan. The hotel we chose was nice, and we enjoyed the local cuisine, hot springs, and the mesmerizing northern lights, creating cherished memories. As our delightful journey neared its end, we began our journey back home, feeling a tinge of sadness that it was over. We talked about planning another getaway someday. However, just as we were about to reach home, a sudden realization struck me. Did I remember to lock the bathroom window before leaving the house? Living on the 4th floor of an apartment building with a small bathroom window, I didn't think there was a risk of burglary. Still, the thought crossed my mind, and I mentioned it to Stephen. His casual response was, "It'll be fine. My mother and sister are there." I was perplexed. What? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law are at our house now. I didn't hear about this. Stephen, with a calm expression, casually replied, "Oh, didn't I tell you? They said they'd clean up while we're away. It's really helpful, you know. Dust piles up after 3 or 4 days." He said it cheerfully, revealing that he had given the house keys to my mother-in-law without informing me. This revelation stirred my frustration once again. From that point, I barely spoke to Stephen and hurried home faster than usual, anxious about what was happening in our house. Upon entering the living room, as expected, they were having another gathering. Moreover, dishes made from food likely taken from our refrigerator were spread out. "Oh, you're back. Did you have a good time?" My mother-in-law casually called out. I was in no state to give her a proper answer. Despite her mention of cleaning up, the place was messier than before, and there were even more bags from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Seeing all that, I couldn't contain my frustration any longer. "Enough. What are you doing? Please go home. This is our house. It's a problem if you keep doing as you please," I blurted out, unable to hold back my emotions. My mother-in-law remarked, "Why are you so upset?" I'm not in a position to say anything. This is Stephen's house, so there shouldn't be a problem with whatever we, as his family, do. My sister-in-law, adopting a somewhat arrogant attitude, added, "Exactly, Faye. If anything, we have more right to live here than you." I just can't grasp their perspective. I'm contributing to the expenses of this house too, you know. It's as much my home as it is yours, so I expect you to seek my permission as well. I was overcome with a sense that I no longer wanted to hold back. There was also a concern that if I didn't speak up, they would overstep their bounds. What fueled my determination further was the unexpected remark, "Hey, Faye, you need to stop. How can you speak to my family like that? We're all going to live here from now on. Don't be so selfish." His words left me momentarily stunned. Living with these in-laws? Was it decided without my knowledge again? Unable to suppress my frustration, I retorted back to Stephen. So why do you make decisions on your own without informing me? Can't you consult with me at least once? Who's being selfish here? This is ridiculous. The cheerful atmosphere from our honeymoon trip was nowhere to be found. The room had turned into a battlefield, but as always, Stephen was the one to put an end to the tension. Enough. If you dislike living here so much, Faye, you can leave, he commanded, as if delivering a final blow. Surprisingly, his words had the opposite effect on me. They brought a sense of calm. It dawned on me that I couldn't continue living with these people. If that's the case, there's no reason for me to stick around with Stephen and the others. I could have questioned Stephen when he made that statement. Are you sure about that? However, my inclination to avoid further entanglement prevailed. Thus, I nonchalantly responded, all the while sporting a smirk. Okay, got it. I'll be out of here in no time. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law might not have grasped why I was grinning, but they would eventually figure it out. Subsequently, I swiftly packed only the essentials and left the house. Stephen's parting words were cool off for a while, but I was already composed and harbored no intention of returning. He seemed to assume I would come back. I reached out to my parents, requested temporary accommodation, initiated divorce preparations, and commenced the search for a new place to live. Although Stephen attempted to call me several times, I ignored him due to my busy schedule. After about 2 months, I had settled into my new residence. Recalling that I still had belongings at the house shared with Stephen, I decided to answer his call for the first time in a while. It was evident from the start that he was in a state of panic. Faye, finally. What are you doing? Come back now, he urgently repeated. Indeed, Stephen believed I was returning. Remembering this, I responded firmly, no, I'm not coming back. In fact, I've already filed for divorce and consulted with a lawyer. Let's discuss the property division. He was taken aback. Divorce? Please not that. I can't deal with that right now, he pleaded, growing even more frantic. To be frank, I had a pretty good idea of what was happening. When I inquired, what's the matter? He confessed, I'm broke. I'm already in debt, so come back quickly. Well, that wasn't entirely surprising. I had seen it coming. Perhaps he thought he could afford to kick me out, assuming I would return. But to his disappointment, he was mistaken. Stephen wasn't earning much to begin with. His take-home pay was around $2,000 a month, and the monthly mortgage for the condo we bought was $2,000. So how was he managing it? I was contributing $1,500, and he was only putting in $500. Given that I was earning over 3 times his salary, it wasn't an issue. That's why I covered all other expenses like utilities and groceries. Even our honeymoon had to be modest because he claimed he had no money. At some point, I realized that it wasn't that he had expensive tastes. He simply lacked the income. Once I left, he had to shoulder all the expenses on his own. The condo was in his name, and the payments were deducted from his account. Consequently, with my departure, he lost the $1,500 I used to contribute every month. To make matters worse, Stephen's unemployed mother-in-law and sister-in-law were now living with him, undoubtedly adding to the living expenses. Therefore, it was natural for me to feel upset when Stephen made decisions about the house independently or casually used items from the fridge. With just his salary, they wouldn't be able to make ends meet for a month, and drowning in debt seemed inevitable at this rate. My mother was furious, demanding, "Why did you kick Faye out? Come back home immediately and do something." I was left speechless, realizing that his mother and sister were under the mistaken impression that he earned a decent living given his title as a store manager. However, the harsh reality was that this title didn't necessarily translate into a high salary. We had bought a reasonably decent condo, and they wholeheartedly believed that Stephen was the primary contributor. It was pitiful and could only be described as foolish. Additionally, it turned out that the mother-in-law, having exhausted all her deceased husband's assets, ended up moving into my house broke. Despite previously living in a rented apartment, they seemed to have properly terminated that lease. The situation made me cringe at having any familial ties with them. Now more than ever, I wanted to finalize our divorce. Upon suggesting, proceed with the divorce process with your lawyer. Then we'll discuss the financial aspects. Stephen responded, "Oh, really? Okay, so all I have to do is fill out the paperwork with my lawyer and send it back to the court, right?" His voice sounded relieved. Our divorce was finalized without any complications. While visiting my previous residence to organize my belongings, I completed the shipping procedures for my luggage. Despite his mother and sister being present, Stephen said, "Phew, you really saved me, Faye. I'm already $10,000 in debt. If things continue as they are, it's going to increase by another $5,000 this month." I was shocked at how rapidly he accumulated such a substantial debt. Evidently, his mother and sister had extremely poor spending habits, yet they seemed shameless, grinning while relying on my financial support. So, I suggested, how about your mother and sister start working for the money? If all three of you contribute, it should somehow work out, right? Stephen and his mother were taken aback, and he questioned, "Aren't you going to help us out? What does that mean?" Calmly, I responded, "What does that mean? That should be my question. Why should I cover your living expenses? Earn your own share. I didn't say I would pay. I said I would consider it. So I came up with a way for you guys to sustain yourselves." They started making a commotion, insisting, "This wasn't our agreement. Are you really our daughter-in-law?" I replied, "I'm not your daughter-in-law anymore, so good luck." I then got into my car and left my former residence. After a while, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law reluctantly began their job search. However, due to their laziness, they didn't make much progress. Meanwhile, the loans kept piling up, and living expenses continued to grow. Despite this, they maintained extravagant tastes, and Stephen's debt only escalated. Eventually, he resorted to borrowing from some risky sources, living in constant fear of debt collectors. On the other hand, I could finally use my hard-earned money for myself, enjoying hobbies and travel. Living a fulfilled life motivated me even more at work. One day, a colleague at work, who had been a listening ear during my complaints about Stephen, approached me and said, "You've been glowing recently, Faye." This became an opportunity for us to start dating, further enriching my daily life. When I was 16, my parents told me to leave home because they needed space for my sister's new baby. Feeling abandoned, I shared my story online, and when my dad realized that his wealthy parents might cut him out of their will, he pleaded with me to take down the post. I just turned 16 last week, but there was no celebration or party for me. My parents barely acknowledged my birthday before telling me I had to leave our house. It turns out my older sister Amanda, who's always been their favorite, is pregnant. Despite having enough space in our 4-bedroom house, they want me to move to my aunt's place to make room for the baby. My parents have never been very caring towards me, but this felt like a new low. They were dead serious during our talk, so I knew they weren't joking or trying to prank me. After explaining that they needed the extra space and that I was old enough to leave, we sat in silence for a while. They promised to continue supporting me financially until I turned 18 and ensure I had everything I needed, but they couldn't have me living with them anymore. I didn't want to argue, but I asked why they couldn't use the guest room for the nursery. They hesitated before admitting they'd given it to Amanda's boyfriend to stay with them. So in short, my parents had their own room, my sister and her boyfriend had another, and the baby would have its own too. Amanda wasn't home, probably on purpose to avoid seeing me leave and feeling guilty. We weren't close due to our age gap, but she'd never been mean to me either. We were mostly polite to each other. But if she was okay with me leaving so she could make room for her baby and boyfriend, maybe she wasn't the sister I thought she was. It hurt, especially on my birthday, but I didn't argue and agreed to go. It's clear to me now that my parents are beyond help. There's no magic phrase to make my parents care about me, and I've come to terms with that.
So when they said they wanted me to move in with my aunt, I quietly went to my room and started packing. They helped, but it felt more like they were hurrying me along. They drove me to my aunt's, chatting happily all the way, oblivious to my silence as I stared out the window. When we arrived, they dropped me off without a hug or kiss, then drove off. My aunt greeted me warmly, genuinely happy to see me. We talked, and eventually, I shared my disappointment with my parents' actions. Her smile vanished, replaced by concern, when I recounted the morning's events. Without a word, my aunt grabbed her phone and excused herself to make a call in the other room. It was unusually quiet for a while until I heard her raising her voice, something she rarely did. I knew someone must have really upset her to provoke such a reaction. When she returned, her face was flushed with anger, a rare sight for her gentle demeanor. She explained that it was my parents who had angered her so much. Apparently, my dad, her brother, had falsely claimed that I had suggested the living arrangement for the baby's sake and that I was perfectly content moving in with my aunt. That's why my aunt was fine with taking me in. She could see I wasn't happy living with my parents, so my suggestion didn't seem out of place to her. Dad tried to persuade her, but she's single and not planning on marriage or kids, so having me around was like having a roommate, and Dad would cover my expenses. She genuinely liked having me and thought I wanted to be there, so she agreed. But now that she knew the truth, she called Dad to confront him. It was messed up, and she wasn't going to let it slide. After the call, she was upset, and so was I. This wasn't something most kids my age dealt with. I always knew they favored my sister, but this was extreme. They had lied to my aunt to cover up their actions, knowing how terrible it was. They gave up the guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job and his own place. Amanda could have easily moved in with him, but my parents insisted she stay home to be closer to them, even if it meant sacrificing my comfort. It hurt me deeply, so I decided to go online and reveal what they had done. Unsure if my aunt would support me, I waited until she left the room, then posted everything on my phone without a second thought. I detailed not only that day's events, but also how my parents consistently treated me unfairly, making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. It was an emotional moment for me, and the post reflected that. After posting, tears streamed down my face. I turned off my phone, fearing the consequences. An hour later, I attempted to read but couldn't concentrate. When my aunt woke up, she hurried to the living room, where I sat since arriving. She calmly asked if I had posted something. I admitted I had. That was the extent of our conversation. I powered on my phone to find that family members had seen the post, and I had received numerous texts from my parents and sister. Meanwhile, relatives commented, expressing support, some reaching out to offer help. Despite the support from relatives, reading my parents' messages filled me with dread. They were seething with anger and hatred, demanding I remove the post. My dad's messages were particularly hurtful, even expressing regret for my existence. My mom's echoed his sentiments. The only slightly different message came from my sister, who simply asked to speak in person. I was overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and messages, unsure how to respond. So, I set my phone aside and withdrew from communication for a few days. Eventually, I decided to block my parents, feeling no desire to engage with them further. I knew my parents were obligated to support me financially until I turned 18, so besides that, I saw no reason to communicate with them. My aunt supported my decision, and if my dad tried to contact her, she didn't mention it to me. We acted as if nothing had happened, indicating her support for me. That was all I needed. For the past week, I had little to no contact with my parents. However, today they unexpectedly appeared outside my school, visibly upset. Fortunately, my friends, who were aware of the situation, surrounded me as a protective barrier, allowing me to avoid interaction with my parents if I chose not to. Despite my reluctance, they continued calling my name, forcing me to acknowledge them. I approached them and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them. However, they ignored my plea and insisted that I accompany them home immediately. Their sudden change of heart baffled me, considering how little I mattered to them before. It seemed like they were only concerned about their reputation among family members. Refusing to go anywhere until I understood their motives, I demanded an explanation for their behavior. They appeared angry yet insistent on my return. Concerned about my friends overhearing, I requested privacy to speak with them. Once my friends were out of earshot, my parents revealed the reason for their sudden appearance. They explained that they needed me to come back because I had been ignoring their calls and texts, and it was crucial for them to have me return to secure their inheritance. After my online post, word spread throughout the family, reaching my grandparents. Knowing that my paternal grandparents were quite wealthy, they threatened my dad, stating that if they didn't improve their treatment of me and reconcile, my dad would forfeit his inheritance. They were informed that if they failed to mend our relationship and ensure my well-being, my aunt, who was caring for me, would inherit instead. Losing the inheritance was not an option for my dad, as it represented a significant amount of money. Although my parents had a decent income, I understood their desire to secure their inheritance. However, their approach left much to be desired. It was clear they were acting in their own self-interest, not mine. Their lack of empathy was glaring, and I refused to play along. I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away, ignoring their pleas. Taking the bus back to my aunt's, I recounted the ordeal to her, and she shared my frustration. To prevent a repeat, she enlisted the help of her lawyer to explore options for my custody. Despite my parents' legal rights, I knew changes were necessary for me to live with my aunt. I also reached out to my grandparents to thank them for intervening, but made it clear I had no desire to return home after experiencing life with my aunt. I finally felt liberated. Living with my parents had been stifling, and I held on to hope for change that never came. Since my grandparents lived in another city, our meetings were infrequent. However, during holiday gatherings, my parents put on a facade to conceal the truth of my treatment at home. It wasn't outright cruelty, but rather neglect and avoidance. While everything appeared fine on the surface, spending a few days at my parents' house would reveal that they mostly ignored me, focusing solely on my sister. With her pregnancy, the situation worsened, and I was completely sidelined. I confided in my grandparents about everything, and they assured me that if living with my aunt was what I wanted, they would ensure it happened. They promised to cover all my needs if my parents relinquished their rights. This conversation brought me immense relief, but it was short-lived. Just a few hours later, I received an email from my dad. It wasn't hostile, but it was disheartening. He expressed disappointment in my decision to share our family issues online, arguing that my grandparents would have learned about it eventually. Now, not only were my grandparents upset with them, but they were also facing backlash from other relatives, feeling ostracized, which they deemed unfair. He mentioned that even some of his colleagues had come across the post because it was public and had appeared on their feeds due to his tagging. This had created an uncomfortable situation for him at work, and he believed that my actions had unnecessarily stirred up drama in their lives. In hindsight, I regretted sharing the story about my parents asking me to leave on my 16th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your supportive words mean a lot to me, so thank you. Now, addressing some of the questions many of you have asked regarding why I hadn't left my parents' house earlier and why I waited for them to ask me to leave, especially when my grandparents and aunt were willing to assist. The reason I didn't seek help earlier is that, as I mentioned in the original post, I wasn't subjected to outright cruelty. While I wasn't treated poorly, I felt ignored and unwelcome, which in its own way is a form of mistreatment. However, I convinced myself that as long as I had shelter and food, I was fine, even if I didn't feel loved. The neglect had become so normalized for me that I didn't realize its impact. As for why I didn't turn to my family for assistance, I didn't want to burden them. I feared the consequences if they refused to help and my parents found out. My parents placed great importance on appearances, so I kept my struggles to myself, suffering in silence. Additionally, my aunt didn't offer to take me in earlier out of respect for my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would want to live with her. However, the current situation unfolded naturally, and in hindsight, it's turned out for the best, albeit a bit late. My aunt is currently consulting with a lawyer to pursue transferring my custody rights to her, which will likely be challenging given the stakes involved with the inheritance. However, I have confidence that my grandparents and aunt will support me, even if it leads to legal proceedings. My aunt has been genuinely remorseful since my arrival, acknowledging the neglect I faced at home and regretting not intervening sooner. At least now, there's clarity within my family, and I'm feeling optimistic about the future. Regarding my sister, she reached out to me, expressing a desire to meet in person. Unsure how to respond, I chose to ignore her message. While she hasn't been overtly unkind to me personally, she has adopted the same distant behavior as my parents. I had assumed that the decision to kick me out for her boyfriend and child was her idea, leading me to believe that our relationship might sour further as a result. I didn't respond to her initial message. Despite our strained relationship, I still felt closer to her than my parents because she treated me kindly whenever we interacted. It wasn't her fault that my parents favored her over me. So when she reached out again 3 days ago, asking me to visit, I decided to call her and inquire about her intentions. I assumed she wanted me to come back home, but to my surprise, she explained that she was currently living with her boyfriend and wasn't feeling well enough to go out. Instead, she wanted us to discuss the family situation. Intrigued, I agreed to meet her. Upon arriving, she began by apologizing for never standing up for me, despite knowing our parents' biased treatment. While they overlooked my achievements to celebrate hers, I always felt like the least wanted child. However, she admitted to never feeling comfortable confronting our parents about this issue, especially since I appeared to tolerate it. Her reluctance to speak up contributed to the status quo. Now realizing how unfair this was, she apologized and expressed a desire for change. She also revealed that the living arrangement was a surprise to her, as our parents hadn't discussed it with her. She was shocked to learn that they had asked me to leave to make room for the new baby and her boyfriend because she had no prior knowledge of this plan. In fact, she hadn't requested any such arrangement. Her original intention was to stay with our parents until the baby was a few months old, at which point she planned to move in with her boyfriend. She had considered leaving earlier but stayed at our parents' insistence. However, after reading my post, she realized that the situation couldn't continue and decided to move out within a week. This decision led to a major confrontation with our parents, who disagreed with her choice to leave. They accused her of being ungrateful and selfish, despite the fact that she had never made any promises to them. They had simply assumed things on their own. As a result of this disagreement, they stopped speaking to each other. In the end, all the drama amounted to nothing, as my parents ended up losing both of their children. At least she had the decency to apologize for her shortcomings as a sister and as a person in general, which I accepted because harboring resentment wouldn't benefit me in any way. We had a heart-to-heart conversation, and she assured me, much like my aunt did, that she would be there for me unconditionally from now on. It was a comforting reassurance. It's been almost a week since I made my original post, and I still haven't heard from my parents since the email. I assume they've abandoned their attempts to reconcile with me. I suspect my grandparents played a role in this, as they called me to inform me that my parents would no longer bother me and that I need not worry about them showing up at my school or contacting me again. I hadn't mentioned my dad's email to them, so I assumed there was a discussion between my parents and grandparents. Although I'm unsure about the details of their conversation, I believe my parents have given up by now. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today my aunt delivered some surprising news. My parents have agreed to relinquish their parental rights. The legal formalities are underway, and soon my aunt will become my legal guardian. It's a mix of emotions for me. On one hand, I'm relieved that I'll finally have a home where I feel valued and wanted, but on the other hand, there's a sense of emptiness and sadness. It's strange to finally see this happening, but I know it's for the best. This is what I've been hoping for. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt took over as my legal guardian. It's official now, and I couldn't be happier. Interestingly, I learned that my parents agreed to give up custody because my grandparents gave them an ultimatum: either lose their entire inheritance or keep 50% and forfeit custody of me, with the condition that they never contact me again. I'm not surprised by their choice, and honestly, I'm not even upset. It feels like I've escaped a troubling situation. Good riddance, I say. I'm still in contact with my sister, although my parents are attempting to reconcile with her before her due date. However, she's requested some time alone, urging them to respect her space and cease their daily attempts to reach out. Honestly, I can't help but chuckle at the chaotic situation they created within their own family. But you know what? I'm content with my aunt, and that's all that truly matters to me. A year back, we promised to love each other forever. I was sure I wanted to be with this kind man. But things changed after we got married. The sweet guy I knew disappeared. Now he treats me like a maid, not his wife. He always tells me to be quiet and just listen to him. I wonder how long this will go on. Little did I know, something good was about to happen. Hi, I'm Michelle Jenkins, 28 years old. I work as a secretary at my dad's company and also manage our home. My dad took over the business from my grandpa 2 years ago. Being the boss's daughter, guys usually approach me for money. I've never really been in love before. I stopped talking about my family to avoid attracting gold diggers. That's when I met David, the man who became my husband. I asked my friend who introduced us to not mention that I'm the boss's daughter. David doesn't gamble or smoke, and he drinks moderately. He was my dream guy, always telling me he loved and adored me. I thought I could spend my life with him. But when I told my dad about marrying David, he said, "Michelle, it's okay to marry him, but don't let him know you're the boss's daughter." I argued, "Dad, he's a good person. He's not after money." Dad insisted, "I don't want you to have problems. Let's revisit this after a year of marriage. If David stays the same, we'll talk about the company." Reluctantly, I agreed. Dad knew about my past bad experiences with guys after money. He just wanted to protect me. I decided to follow Dad's advice and keep quiet about being the boss's daughter for a year. Until then, I'd just be a regular secretary. So despite everything, David and I tied the knot. But now, a year later, I still haven't told him the truth. Why? Because he's changed. After the wedding, he became distant and cold. He'd come home from work in a bad mood, criticizing everything, even the dinners I made. "Hamburgers again? We're not kids. Can't you cook something different?" "But David, you used to love them. I've made them lots before." "Don't argue. You always make the same dishes. Besides salad and soup, you should know how to cook at least 5 other things." 5? That's too much. I have work too, you know. When I ask you to do something, you should do it. I married you, so listen to me. I'm sorry. The warmth and kindness he once had vanished, replaced by a coldness that felt as sharp as ice. At first, I thought he was just having a rough day, but things kept getting worse. After 6 months of marriage, David turned into a full-blown tyrant. He'd nitpick about everything, from how I did the laundry to how I cleaned the house. If I dared to speak up, he'd yell at me with a terrifying look. Enduring his yelling was one thing, but sometimes he'd even throw away the meals I cooked. A year into our marriage, his tyrannical behavior hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Just the other day, I got home late from work, and he immediately started shouting, "You're late. Do you even know what time it is?" I'm sorry. Work got busy. I'll start dinner now." Busy? A secretary like you shouldn't have that much work. If you're late again, you're quitting your job. But that's not fair. I couldn't argue with him out of fear. Looking back, I wonder if I should have left him sooner. Despite my parents' concerns, I kept the truth hidden after getting married. I didn't want to disappoint them, so I dealt with everything silently. Then one day at work, my father called me into the reception room during a break. Since I often helped him as a secretary, going into the reception room wasn't unusual. When I entered, my father was already there. "What's up?" I asked. My father looked pleased and said, "It's been a year since you married David, right? Time to tell him the truth. like you promised. Oh yeah, we agreed on that. Is something wrong? You seem uneasy. Well, yes, but it's just, right now things are a bit. Seeing my worried face, my father smiled and patted my shoulder. Had a spat with David? It happens, especially for newlyweds like you. Your mom and I had our share of arguments too. But look at us now, still happy together. You'll be fine, Michelle. It's not exactly a fight. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Couples argue, right? You're right. Anything else bothering you? No, I'm okay. Nothing else. But I think I'll wait for things to calm down a bit before bringing it up, I said. Don't let it bother you too much. Every couple has their disagreements. My father reassured me, thinking it was just a small argument. I hadn't confided in my parents about David's behavior to spare them worry, so my father assumed everything was fine. You should make amends with David soon, he advised before leaving the room. Alone, I wrestled with emotions I couldn't articulate. Despite my parents' reservations, I had married David. I couldn't bear to tell my father about our worsening relationship. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I'd have to address it eventually to avoid suspicion. To keep my father from worrying, I had to maintain my marriage somehow. If possible, I wanted to improve our relationship. That night, I made sure to be home on time, ready to talk to David when he returned. As I finished preparing dinner, he walked through the door. I brought up the topic right away. David, we need to talk, I said. I'm tired, he complained. This is important, I insisted. As a married couple, I want us to share our lives equally and be happy together. Equal? You and me? That's ridiculous, he scoffed, grabbing my hair harshly. Ouch! I cried out, but he didn't let go. Listen to me. I did you a favor by marrying you. You should be grateful I chose you, he said, sneering at my pain. But you said you loved me? I protested. Don't be foolish. I only pretended to like you because you're obedient and good at housework, he spat. Just stay quiet and obey me, he ordered, pulling my hair closer to his face. From that moment on, I realized there was no hope for equality in our relationship. I couldn't bear to worry my parents, and divorce wasn't an option. My appetite faded away with each passing day, and I found myself merely coexisting with my roommate, who happened to be my husband. Then one morning, amidst this routine, I woke up feeling utterly drained. My head throbbed, and a chill ran through my body. Checking my temperature, I found it to be a high 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Summoning all my strength, I sat up and called out to my husband. David, I'm sorry. I don't think I can manage breakfast today. What? Why not? I pleaded. I have a fever of 104. I'm in agony. Can I just stay in bed? In response, my husband let out a frustrated sigh and snapped. Neglecting your duties because of a fever. Get to work, you lazy thing. But please understand, I'm really unwell. Enough excuses. You're just a maid. Don't you dare disobey me. Please, just for today, I'm begging you. With a loud click of his tongue, he stormed out of the room, leaving me trembling uncontrollably. I finally realized I was being pushed to my limit. If I keep going like this, I'll truly break down. This way of life will drive me insane, both mentally and physically. I know I need to take action, but I'm too exhausted to think clearly with this fever clouding my mind. Maybe it's the stress catching up to me, but I drift back to sleep. Hours later, I'm jolted awake by my husband's furious voice. Didn't I tell you to wake up, you idiot? Confused, I see it's already dark outside. While my fever has dropped, I still feel weak with a lingering headache. Despite my condition, he continues his tirade. I called you several times. What were you doing sleeping? Called? I sent you a text that I'm bringing my boss home. Weren't you supposed to prepare drinks and snacks? My husband demanded. Wait a minute. You knew I was sick today, right? And yet you brought your boss home? I invited him to continue drinking at home. My promotion depends on this. Get up and get things ready now. No, I can't. I'm still in my pajamas, and I'm not feeling well at all. Stop making excuses. Just get out here now. He yanked me by the arm and forced me to stand in the kitchen, then hurried back to his boss. Sorry to keep you waiting. Please come on in. I could hear my husband speaking cheerily from the entrance. Are you sure this is okay this late? I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate. That's what I've been saying. I don't have a wife, just a housemaid. I'm a housemaid. Kind of like a main wife, you could say. But please don't mind. With that, my husband ushered his boss into the living room. I stood in my pajamas, feeling embarrassed and makeup-free. Nice to meet you. My husband talks about you often. I apologize for my appearance, I said, bowing my head. I'm Mr. Smith, the section chief. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. Please don't worry about me. I'll prepare something right away, you replied. As I hurried back to the kitchen, hiding my face, my husband started scolding me. Hurry up and make something. You're utterly useless, he berated. I'm sorry. Just give me a moment, I pleaded. Stop talking and start working, he snapped. How much more embarrassing do you need to be, even with the section chief here? I'm sorry. I apologize, Mr. Smith. Our maid is quite incompetent, my husband explained. The section chief remained silent, his expression tense. Despite my efforts to prepare drinks and snacks, my husband continued to make cutting remarks like, "You're really useless." While my husband was in the bathroom, Section Chief Smith initiated a conversation. "Excuse me." I couldn't ignore him, so despite feeling flustered, I responded, "Yes, is there something you need?" "You're CEO Allen's daughter, aren't you?" My last name used to be Allen, I confirmed, realizing he meant my father, CEO Allen. "How did you know?" "I visited your father's company for business before. You served me tea once, right?" "Wait, you were from that time?" I typically attended meetings with our business partners, serving tea and being introduced as Mr. Allen's daughter. Smith was one of those people. Although David's workplace had become a client of my father's company, I hadn't told my father that David worked there. Glancing towards the bathroom, Smith continued in a hushed tone. "What's going on with your husband's behavior? Is he always like this at home?" Yes, I admitted. "I can't believe what you've been enduring. Why haven't you told Mr. Allen?" "Well, regardless, this can't continue." "Leave it to me," Smith said, looking me straight in the eyes as he quickly packed up and left. In that moment, I felt a weight being lifted off my shoulders. It was like finding an ally in a moment of despair. When David returned from the bathroom, he was shocked to find that Smith had left. "Why didn't you stop him?" He yelled at me, but I chose to trust Smith's words and endure it. Several days later, I was called to my father's company and found both Smith and a visibly shaken David waiting. "What's going on? Why are you both here?" I asked, confused by the situation. In the tense atmosphere, my father addressed me with a serious expression. "I heard from Smith. You've been mistreated by David, haven't you?" Well, I struggled to respond. Understanding my intentions to spare him worry, my father expressed his gratitude. "Thank you, Smith, for bringing this to my attention and helping my daughter," my father said, and Smith bowed in acknowledgement. Then, my father turned his stern gaze towards David. "David, I can't believe you've behaved this way. I regret allowing you to marry my daughter." "Please wait," David pleaded, visibly shaken. "I had no idea you were our business partner's president." "I didn't know Michelle was a CEO's daughter," David interjected. "Enough. So if you did know, you would have treated Michelle better." "You're truly despicable," my father rebuked. "No, there's no excuse for my behavior," David responded. "Excuses? I'm going to report you to your company's CEO. We have a long-standing relationship," my father declared. "No, please." David's eyes welled up with tears as he sank to his knees. Then he turned to me, pleading, "Michelle, please talk to your father for me." "You want me to speak up?" I raised my voice, releasing my pent-up frustrations. "Do you have any idea how much I've suffered because of your controlling, chauvinistic behavior? I've endured it silently, trying to salvage our relationship. But you destroyed everything, treating me like a servant and constantly belittling me. Do you know how degrading that was?" "Michelle, please forgive me," David begged. "Enough. Don't you dare address me by my name so casually. No amount of apologies will ever be enough. I don't care what happens to you. You reap what you sow. If you understand, stay out of my life forever, I concluded, resolute in my decision. At the climax of my outburst, David broke down in tears. Smith gently guided him out of the reception room, offering a respectful bow before leaving. Eventually, David and I decided to divorce. When my father informed David's company's president about the incident, he lost his job due to poor behavior at work. Without any severance pay, David moved back in with his parents, who were already aware of the situation. His father reprimanded him severely and forced him to leave their home. Now, David works long hours at a factory to make ends meet, while also fulfilling his alimony obligations to me. Meanwhile, I returned to my parents' home after the divorce and focused on rebuilding my life. I've since fully recovered and dedicated myself to my career. I've maintained a close friendship with Smith, meeting him regularly. Although I'm not considering remarriage at the moment, if I do decide to tie the knot again, I hope to find someone like him. When that time comes, my dream is to create a happy and fulfilling family.
Thank you for taking care of my daughter for a year. When my sister-in-law came back from her trip overseas, she came straight to our house. She tried to take my almost 1-year-old daughter, thanking me for looking after her own daughter for a year. I got really worried and stopped her, telling her that the baby was actually mine, but she didn't seem to understand. I left her in the yard feeling uneasy. What I didn't know then were the scary things she was about to say, which really scared me. When she saw I wasn't joking, her face went pale. That's when everything started getting chaotic because of my sister-in-law. This all started about 1.5 years ago when Megan, my 25-year-old sister-in-law, suddenly came back to her parents' home with a baby. She said, "My husband got moved overseas suddenly, but I'm scared of raising our little one in a foreign place. It's all so new to me. Oh, and I'm pregnant too. I hope our kids can be friends. If it's Kristen's baby, they'll be so cute together. It's weird to think of being friends with my sister-in-law," Megan said. Megan was friendly and talked to me easily, even though I was a bit older. It made me think we could be good friends. Even after I had my own baby, I lived in a separate house with my 30-year-old husband, while Megan stayed with her parents. It's great that Megan's place is nearby. We can hang out whenever we want. I thought we all get along well with her and my husband's parents, I thought. But soon, I realized I was being too trusting. After moving back in with her parents, Megan started revealing her true self bit by bit. "Sorry, Kristen. I have something urgent and can't take care of my baby. Can you watch her for me?" "Sure, but what's going on?" "My dad hurt his back. I need to get him some patches," Megan would explain. Feeling sympathetic, I happily took care of her baby. But this became a regular thing, with Megan always finding reasons to leave her child with me. That wasn't the only issue though. "Sorry, I need you to look after my baby again today, Kristen." "Megan, are you lying to me?" "What? Why would you say that?" Her reaction was over the top, making me sigh. "Do you think I'm clueless? Your dad has never had back problems." Did I say that? I can't remember. She couldn't even keep track of her lies. And there was more. "Hey, someone said they saw you out in town." "Huh? Who snitched?" "No, it must have been someone who looked like me." "Who are you going to believe? Some random person or your sister-in-law?" Despite her attempt to convince me, her acting was terrible. "Take care of your own child. I'm done helping you." "What? Why? That's not fair." Megan threw a fit like a child but then stopped suddenly, as if she had an idea. "Fine. I'll make you want to take care of my child yourself." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she smirked, grabbed the baby, and left our house. Feeling uneasy, I talked to my husband and in-laws about Megan's behavior, but it was like talking to a wall. She showed no remorse or understanding. And she had a plan. One afternoon, while I was napping on the couch with my pregnant belly, I heard a baby crying. Is it from a neighbor's house? It sounds too close, I thought. Then my phone rang. "Hello, Kristen speaking." "Hey, Kristen, please take care of my baby." "What? Didn't I tell you I won't watch her anymore?" Megan chuckled like my refusal was funny. "It's too late. I already dropped my baby at your doorstep a while ago." I rushed to the door, alarmed. "I found a baby crying on my doorstep, Megan." "What were you thinking?" I exclaimed. "Well, you were being mean, so I had no choice." Megan replied, sounding gleeful as if she had just pulled off a prank. I told you, didn't I? I'd make you want to take care of my child. You wouldn't leave a baby on the doorstep, right? Stop joking. Where are you now? I demanded. Guess if I suppose it's hard for you to go out since you're pregnant. Megan laughed and abruptly hung up. When I tried calling her back, her phone was turned off. Despite my protests, when she finally returned in the evening, she ignored my words. This kept happening until I reluctantly started checking the doorstep and taking the baby whenever Megan called. Megan unapologetically said she was helping me practice for my upcoming childbirth, expecting me to be thankful. I'm not asking for thanks, but isn't there something to be said about attitude? I got more and more annoyed and stressed by her actions. This went on for 6 months until something happened a year ago. Going abroad for a bit. That's all Megan left before disappearing suddenly. No one knew where she went, but it wasn't surprising considering her habit of spontaneous trips funded by her part-time job earnings. My husband casually mentioned, it's nothing new. She probably went to see her husband since he was transferred overseas. We assumed she took her baby to meet its father. Our family, caught up in our own worries, hardly talked about Megan. Just before she disappeared, I went into labor 2 weeks early and was rushed to the hospital, caught off guard by the sudden birth of our beloved daughter. With all the commotion of an unexpected delivery and adjusting to being new parents, discussions about Megan faded. Before we knew it, a year had passed since she left. As my daughter's first birthday approached, our peaceful life was disrupted once again by Megan. I'm back, her familiar voice echoed through the unlocked front door. Megan, you're back from overseas? I asked, hardly believing it. Ignoring what I said, she went straight to my daughter. Thanks for looking after my daughter for a year, she said suddenly, then tried to take my child away. Hey, what are you doing with my child? I exclaimed, quickly taking her back. Megan looked confused. Come on, just because you've had her for a year doesn't mean you get to act like her mother. This child is really my daughter. Both of us were confused for a moment. Megan, didn't you take your own child with you overseas? What are you talking about? I left her in your yard, Megan said, cutting me off. It seemed like we were talking past each other, but I felt something awful might be happening. You mentioned leaving a child for a year when you went abroad. You left her in my yard, and that's what I've been saying. At that time, I had just given birth to this child and was in a hospital due to poor health. So I really don't know where your child is now. Shocked by the revelation, Megan's face went pale as she stuttered in disbelief. This is serious. We need to call the police, I said, reaching for my phone. But Megan grabbed my arm with trembling hands. Wait, please don't call the police. But how can we not? Please, I'll be in big trouble if you do, Megan said, looking really scared. I understood how serious the situation was, so I decided to tell our family about it. I called my husband and our in-laws to explain what was going on. But when I finished the call and turned around, Megan had disappeared. I was upset that she ran away when I wasn't looking. I felt really angry at Megan. After I called them, my husband and in-laws came to our house. My husband told us that there was indeed a baby in the yard while I was having our baby at the hospital. He didn't know much about Megan's baby and thought she took it away somewhere. He called the police to take care of the baby. We were so focused on our new baby that we completely forgot about that incident. Megan's child would have been around 1 or 2 years old when she finally returned. It's likely she confused my child with her own because they were close in age. After talking with the police, we found out Megan's baby was safe at an orphanage, which was a relief. I decided to let my husband and in-laws take care of Megan's child. But what worried me more was how scared Megan seemed. Her level of fear was unusual. There had to be more to this situation than met the eye. My gut feeling was right when I decided to take action. It looks like we need to teach her a lesson. I told my husband and in-laws. I had something on Megan that I never thought I'd use, but now was the time. It was time to show her. A week later, everything set up, I called Megan. After a few rings, she nervously picked up. Megan, your child is safe. You can come back home now, I assured her. Megan casually came over and rang the doorbell. I was so worried. I'm glad she's safe, Megan said with a careless laugh as she walked into our living room. But what she saw inside was unexpected. What in the world? Aaron and Ben. What are you guys doing here? Megan's husband, or should I say, Her ex-husband, Aaron, was sitting on the sofa, looking angry at her. And on the floor sat her affair partner, Ben, with a sad expression like he was going to cry. "This isn't good," Megan said, trying to leave our house. But my father-in-law, who's a big man, was blocking the doorway, stopping her from leaving. Megan ended up sitting on the floor next to Ben, getting a lecture from my husband, her ex-husband, and our in-laws. "Come on, everything's fine now, right? The child is safe," Megan said stubbornly, puffing out her cheeks. But Aaron's cold stare silenced her. "If you can't even look after the child properly, maybe you should give up custody and the child support payments," Aaron said, his tone icy. When I talked to Aaron, he told me that everything Megan had told us was a lie. He hadn't been sent overseas, and they had divorced because of her cheating. Despite that, Megan had managed to get custody of their child during the divorce and was getting a lot of money from Aaron for child support. Even if the parent with custody cheats, they still get child support. That's why Megan panicked when I wanted to call the police. She was scared of what would happen if they found out she wasn't actually taking care of their child. I explained to everyone. I felt really disappointed by Megan's selfishness. "Kristen, you have to help me. I can't pay back the child support," Megan begged. "But you're the one who left the baby with me. You can't deny that. Don't try to make excuses. Do you have any evidence?" I asked calmly, while Megan screamed in panic. I showed her the video from my phone. "After you kept leaving your baby at my doorstep, I installed a security camera for safety. It's important to keep the baby safe," I explained. Megan gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "When did you record this?" "Ever since you began leaving your child at my doorstep. This video shows that you haven't been taking care of your responsibilities as a parent. Wouldn't it be better for the child to be with Aaron?" I asked. Megan, biting her lip and growling softly, suddenly turned to Ben, who was sitting beside her, and burst into tears. "Help me, Ben. Everyone's picking on me." But Ben, who appeared to have viewed Megan as just a casual relationship, gently pushed her away. "I have another family, Megan. You've betrayed me too. Who do you think paid for our trip around the world with the child support money?" Megan gasped, realizing her mistake. "But is that really so wrong?" She tried to argue. "It's not exactly a good thing," I said firmly. Megan finally felt remorseful, sobbing and repeatedly apologizing, even falling to her knees on the floor. "Please wait. I'm so sorry. Just forgive me," she begged. However, I couldn't let Megan off the hook easily. "Remember, I won't forget how you've treated your child and me. You need to think hard about what you've done," I said firmly. Megan was taken away by the police, arrested, and her daughter was returned to Aaron, who got custody back. Now, Megan has to pay $500 in child support every month until the child is grown. Cut off by my husband and in-laws, Megan faces a tough road ahead. Even as she gets out of jail, Ben wasn't spared either. His wife filed for divorce and asked for compensation. As for me, I'm living a happy life with my husband and our daughter. Every day brings new joys and discoveries as we watch our daughter grow.